Hi there, this is Reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Chapter 26, Part 2, Gumption Traps. So they're in Prairie City, Oregon, which is one of those towns you see in Oregon and in the West, where you can see the bones of the original Western architecture. They're very spare and flat and surrounded by vastness. So in a restaurant, Chris works on a letter to his mother, and Robert lets him do that. I keep feeling that the facts I'm fishing for concerning Chris are right in front of me too, but that some value rigidity of my own blocks me from seeing it. At times we seem to move in parallel rather than in combination, then at odd moments collide. So I like what Maudib said about this dynamic between them, that they're driven towards, that what they're driven towards is a mutual experience of quality. And when they're both experiencing that quality together, then they're connected. And they can do that through the common experience of the landscape. But the disconnect is between them due to the fact that the father that Chris grew up with has been purposely buried, and that's the value rigidity in Robert that values sanity over insanity. This is really tough on Chris because he idolizes his father. He doesn't seem to care whether he's popular with anyone else. He just wants to be popular with me. And I think what that means is a lot of this is wanting that connection he had with with Phaedrus before the electroshock. Not healthy at all, everything considered. It's about time for him to begin the long process of breaking away. That break should be as easy as possible, but should be made. It's time to set him on his own feet. The sooner the better, says Robert. And now, having thought all that, I don't believe it anymore. I don't know what the trouble is. That dream that keeps recurring haunts me because I can't escape its meaning. I'm forever on the other side of a glass door from him, which I don't open. He wants me to open it, and before I always turn away, but now there's a new figure who prevents me. Strange. So unconsciously, Robert, and I'm using Robert now, this is Modib calls the narrator Robert, and Phaedrus he calls Phaedrus, and I think that makes a lot more sense than the clumsy, clunky, the narrator. So I like that. I like that a lot better, even though the narrator is how they describe Robert's voice in a lot of critical understanding of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I really like calling him Robert a lot better. Unconsciously, Robert is beginning to understand the problem, and that rote, he needs to be more independent, is not where the solution lies, and of course the dream is progressing. So the Gumption Chautauqua continues with the next trap, which is also a value trap, and I thought mistakenly that these traps that we're about to describe were ego traps, but in fact, ego trap is a value trap. So in the last episode, I said we were going to do all the value traps, and we didn't. The ego is another one of them. It's the eternal gumption trap of ego. Ego isn't entirely separate from value rigidity, but is one of the many causes of it. And I did mention that in the last chapter. It's closely related to value rigidity for obvious reasons. If you have a high evaluation of yourself, then your ability to recognize new facts is weakened. Your ego isolates you from the quality reality. So in the ego trap, the center of your understanding is your positive evaluation of yourself. It's not quality. Quality is not in the center. This other thing skewed to the side, let's just say, which is this imaginary world you've created in which you are, at the top. And if you examine this, you could say that this is one of the manifestations of self-deception. But ultimately, all manifestations of self-deception have to do with connecting something other than quality, whether it's values or ego or whatever it is. On any mechanical repair job, ego comes in for tough, rough treatment. You're always being fooled. You're always making mistakes. And a mechanic who has a big ego to defend is at a terrific disadvantage. If you know enough mechanics to think of them as a group, and your observations coincide with mine, I think you'll agree that mechanics tend to be rather modest and quiet. Now, this next paragraph is really important for understanding how Pirsig's philosophy works in the real world. In fact, these traps today characterize what many people seek therapy for. These are the barriers to, let's just say, life satisfaction. You could call it happiness, whatever you want to call it. They are ego, anxiety, and boredom. And I was going to say that the machine doesn't respond to your personality, but it does respond to your personality. It's just that the personality it responds to is your real personality, the one that genuinely feels and reasons and acts, rather than any false blown up personality images your ego might conjure up. These false images are deflated so rapidly and completely, you're bound to be very discouraged very soon if you derived your gumption from ego rather than quality. So something about the real personality, that's what Carl Rogers was trying to get to with this congruence. He wanted your real personality. You know it when what you think, say, and do are congruent. That is Carl Rogers' congruence. That's one way of seeing it. The real personality is that which is tapped into that pre-intellectual awareness, and its actions are based on that. So that congruence is all coming from, the center of quality. So the boxcar material that you have in your boxcars is used as tools again, but the real personality plus, the real personality is you plus the present moment of quality. And the knowledge in your boxcars is how you manifest that quality. The blown up personality conjured up by ego is putting false images at the center of the system and attempting to force your system to operate around that center. This blown up false world in which your ego is always assuaged, let's just say. But you're forcing the system to operate around that center rather than the true center, which is quality. And as many people have demonstrated in this corner of YouTube, what's at the center or at the top of your hierarchy, depending on how you want to characterize it, matters a lot. If modesty doesn't come easily or naturally to you, one way out of this trap is to fake the attitude of modesty anyway. If you just deliberately assume you're not much good, then your gumption gets a boost and the facts prove this assumption is correct. This way you can keep going until the time comes when the facts prove this assumption is incorrect. So there goes the 70s self-esteem movement that was right around the corner. Humility is a method used in spiritual practice to reset your center to be oriented towards the good. Anxiety, the next gumption trap, is sort of the opposite of ego. You're so sure you'll do everything wrong, you're afraid to do anything at all. Often this, rather than laziness, is the real reason you find it hard to get started. So this is the motivational problem. The mistakes you made in the past means you're scared to go on, and this makes you seem lazy. You're very frightened of making these mistakes, and I think the motivation problem is one of the biggest impediments to having a meaningful life. People who don't find meaning in their lives often have real problems with motivation, and in this case he's talking about being scared of mistakes or being so nervous that you make the mistakes, and then labeling, you don't get started, so you say, oh, I'm lazy, or you make the mistakes and you label yourself as incompetent. And that labeling, that low assessment of yourself, like making it so personal, is part of the problem. It isn't. It's part of the whole process. You're going to make mistakes, and that is part of, that's part of what it takes to be a whole person, let's just say. But the solution to anxiety is a tough one, and it often does take therapy. And the best therapeutic solutions for anxiety seem to be exposure therapy, like slowly doing what it is you're frightened of, and also mindfulness meditation practices. Also, sometimes, and this is a big also, so sometimes you have to get the childhood root of why certain things trigger anxiety, why you're frightened of failing, and that could be, kind of having an authoritarian parent, or having to, or neglectful parent where you were responsible for your own survival, and and some mistakes were particularly profound. You should remember that it's peace of mind you're after and not just a fixed machine. And I think, besides the fact that peace of mind is what you want to counter anxiety, what happens in the case of general dissatisfaction in life, and this is what this sentence is kind of, describing as the opposite, is that in general dissatisfaction of life, you're looking to the external fixed machine as being the source of your satisfaction. If everything goes okay in the environment, then I'll be happy. And that is the biggest fallacy you can possibly hold. And it is the source of so much distress. If I can just fix my environment, everything will be fine. Obviously, things in your environment, when they go well or poorly, are going to affect your mental health, but you really have to have a center that can weather whatever happens in the environment. And as long as your happiness is coming from external sources, you're going to have a lot of difficulty. Really, peace of mind before everything else. When beginning a repair job, you can list everything you're going to do on little slips of paper, which you then organize into proper sequence. You discover that you organize and reorganize the sequence again and again as more and more ideas come to you. So the little slips of paper thing I've mentioned several times before, this is how Pirsig actually wrote. Each slip of paper has a discrete concept or a step or an idea on it, and these can be organized and reorganized till they make the more sense. It's a dynamic system. I bet if you kind of looked at it scientifically, it might mirror dynamical systems. So it's dynamic rather than a linear system of writing. And this will be explored at length in Lila, and it is really a great way to do things. Boredom is the next gumption trap that comes to mind. This is the opposite of anxiety and commonly goes with ego problems. Boredom means you're off the quality track. You're not seeing things freshly. You've lost your beginner's mind. Remember that term from Shunryu Suzuki. And your motorcycle is in great danger. Boredom means your gumption supply is low and must be replenished before anything else is done. So if you're bored, he says, stop, don't work on the machine, because you could make a very big mistake. And the loss of beginner's mind is a loss of curiosity, I think. I think curiosity is a great parallel to the things we've been talking about, the seeking, or being on the quality track, or gumption. The beginner's mind is one of freshness, in which preconceived notions are kept at bay so you can see how things really are now. My favorite cure for boredom is sleep. It's very easy to get to sleep when bored and very hard to get bored after a long rest. My next favorite is coffee. I usually keep a pot plugged in while working on the machine. So coffee is frequently a solution for piercing. So that makes him sort of a harbinger in other ways too. Most of us rely on coffee to overcome gumption traps these days. And Robert Pirsig was alive when Starbucks was around. He only died a couple of years ago. If these don't work, it may mean deeper quality problems are bothering you and distracting you from what's before you. The boredom is a signal that you should turn your attention to these problems. That's what you're doing anyway, and control them before continuing on the motorcycle. So yeah, that's another manifestation, like the anxiety of not being able to get your seeking system online, that curiosity. You've got to get all this other stuff reconciled. You need to reconcile a lot of these, peripheral or even very central problems before you can achieve, let's just say, peace of mind. And it's a bigger problem than it sounds. And again, this is where the spiritual practice, the therapy, all that stuff comes in. Remember those three guys talking about sense-making, Daniel, Jordan, and Jamie. they said you have to get yourself together before you can engage in the game B sense-making project. I think that's true. But like I said, this is a bigger problem than it sounds. Sometimes it takes a very long time to reconcile profound psychological problems, especially if they come from a bad childhood. One solution to boredom on certain kinds of jobs, such as greasing and oil changing and tuning, is to turn them into a kind of ritual. I agree with that, especially if you don't like doing these kind of things. If you turn them into a ritual, then they become something, they can become even a little bit addictive, and that's good. If that's a good kind of addiction, if you are not that conscientious, which I relate to. So I've done this myself when it comes to things that I don't want to do. I've turned them into something that really, seems more like a ritual, and that engages you with them. That it's like being addicted to endorphins when you go running. It's absolutely awful, but you get addicted to the way you feel, and that kind of ritual becomes a very healthy thing. Zen has something to say about boredom. Its main practice of just sitting has got to be the world's most boring activity, that is for sure. Unless it's that Hindu practice of being buried alive. You don't do anything much, not move, not think, not care. What could be more boring? Yet in the center of all this boredom is the very thing Zen Buddhism seeks to teach. What is it? What is at the very center of boredom that you are not seeing? One thing that's been obvious all along is that meditative consciousness, this boredom, or just sitting, or just staring at the machine, let's say, is where things are revealed. You need to be quiet long enough to see quality. This just sitting can be an antidote for stuckness, or an antidote for lack of motivation that we were talking about, or for all the traps that get in the way of connecting to quality, which is one of the reasons Pirsig says peace of mind is foundational, and it really is. Peace of mind is foundational to living, to understand how to tap into peace, to cultivate peace of mind, and then evoke it when you need to, is absolutely critical to a quality existence. So the next gumption trap is impatience, which is caused, he says, every time by underestimating the amount of time something will take. In this day and age, I don't know about his solution. He says impatience is best handled by allowing an indefinite time for the job, particularly new jobs that require unfamiliar techniques. Try telling that to upper management, but it's obviously true. By doubling the allotted time when circumstances force time planning, and by scaling down the scope of what you want to do. Overall goals must be scaled down in importance, and immediate goals must be scaled up. This requires value flexibility. So that is just good overall advice, very difficult to implement when you've got other people involved who want things done fast. And I think a lot of times when you have a budget problem, it comes from this. It comes from not allowing the allotted time to do something. So you need to kind of get into a mode where, say, being organized is pleasurable. And, you go back to the ritual thing, a ritual that feels like there's something missing if you're not doing it, getting into the habit. And in his case, such as getting into the habit of cleaning the cycle or recutting threads on screws, when they get rusty or when they get kind of worn down. So they pull into Dayville, Oregon. Dayville has huge shade trees by the filling station where we wait for the attendant to appear. None does, and we, being stiff and uneager to get back on the cycle, do leg exercises under the shade of the trees. Big trees that almost completely cover the road. Odd in this desert-like country. So when the attendant shows up, they get what they need to get done. They fill up the cycle, and then they ask him where can they rest, and the attendant says, just use my front lawn. We do this, stretch out on some long green grass, and I see that the grass and trees are irrigated from a ditch by the road that has a clear moving water in it. We must have slept half an hour when we see John is in a rocking chair on the green grass beside us, talking to a fire warden on another chair. I listen. The conversation's pace intrigues me. It isn't intended to go anywhere, just fill the time of day. I haven't heard steady, slow-paced conversation like that since the 30s, when my grandfather and great-grandfather and uncles and great-uncles used to talk like that, on and on and on, with no point of purpose other than to fill the time. like the rocking of a chair. Yeah, like a rocking of a chair, kind of a peaceful, soothing rhythm. It's sort of it's kind of like you're looking at some of these practices like circling and dialogue and communitas. And I think that this is sort of, while it's not a deep inquiry into and reflective, it's sort of something where people can do together that has a soothing and even sort of has a connective quality to it. You know, this sort of rhythmic, non-directional speech, and you can see this in old movies. It's sort of archetypal. You know, this old speech, the guys with the overalls and the rocking chairs. It's kind of archetypal, like that old pump we were talking about. John sees I'm awake and we talk a little. He says the irrigation water comes from the Chinaman's ditch. You never get a white man to dig a ditch like that, he says. They dug that ditch 80 years ago when they thought there was gold there. You couldn't get a ditch like that anywhere nowadays. He says that's why the trees are so big. So first of all, I hope to God that no one objects to something, you know, that this is where things really get screwed up. Like someone will see that paragraph and freak out about how racist it is, totally missing the point of material that could cause you to become a better person. You know what I'm saying? Like if you say that classical literature is racist, then you are missing stuff that is going to make you the kind of person who will not be a racist, or who won't exploit other people, who will generally be a better person. So, which leads me to believe that oftentimes some of the hysteria has nothing to do with actually solving the problem. And so these trees and this irrigation ditch and all that stuff is a really nice metaphor for something, to point out that something can be very significant if it has unfettered access to quality. Remember that Maudib used the river in the first part of this chapter as a metaphor for the flow of quality. And now we have the flow of this water in the ditch, and it is an access to that water creates these really big, beautiful shade trees in the middle of a desert. So it's a great metaphor. I want to talk now about truth traps and muscle traps, and then stop this Chautauqua for today. Truth traps are concerned with data that are apprehended and within the boxcars of the trade. For the most part, these data are properly handled by conventional dualistic logic and the scientific method we talked about earlier, back just after Miles City. But there's one trap that isn't, the truth trap of yes-no logic. So obviously, you're not going to get rid of logic or scientific method or yes, no. I mean, there's a place for this. There always is. You know, this is working with that within the greater quality. It isn't eliminating this and being all mystical. You know, this is what is great about Pirsig's philosophy, is it's a mixture of what you need when you need it, let's just say. So like we've been saying all along, logic is a tool. And just because you have identified that quality is reality rather than subjects and objects doesn't mean you go off into that mystical space where having a unitive experience with the cosmos is adequate. What it means is you let quality guide you to use what you need to use to get what you need to get done, or to express quality in the way that is the most appropriate. Yes, no logic is obviously binary, like ones and zeros, but just like the computer, there's a third option. And in the case of the computer, the third option is the switch is off. There is no one or zero. And Pirsig calls this this third state, the switched off state, or this non-determinate state, mu. It's a Japanese word. And it's fitting because the trap of yes-no is dualistic. It's typical of Western thinking, not of Eastern thinking. Mu means no thing, like quality. It points outside the process of dualistic discrimination. Mu simply says no class, not one, not zero, not yes, not no. It states that the context of the question is such that a yes-no answer is an error and should not be given. Unask the question is what it says. So I like that. Unask the question. The question is irrelevant. You have to stop and think you have to stop and be with that mu to see what the real question is, I guess. Mu becomes appropriate when the context of the question becomes too small for the truth of the answer. When the Zen monk Joshu was asked whether a dog had a Buddha nature, he said mu, meaning that if he answered either way, he was answering incorrectly. The Buddha nature cannot be captured by yes-no questions. The Buddha nature. So this mu state is really, it represents the larger context that the smaller world of yes-no is embedded in, that the smaller rational stuff is embedded in. Science is nested in religion, says Pajot. And this, let's go back to the Sam Harrison and Jordan Peterson debate. It's the same thing. You know, truth is nested in religion, let's just say, in this bigger thing. You know, from the void come the myriad things, and in Taoism. And these are ways to describe this. The thing about 1-0 is it's a universal state. So you can determine that the yes-no state is universal. You will see it in every application. And you think, because this is the case, that this is the ultimate truth. The question of 1-0 has been unasked. There are plenty of other computer conditions besides power-off condition in which mu answers are found because of larger context than the 1-0 universality, the universality. The dualistic mind tends to think of mu occurrences in nature as a kind of contextual cheating or irrelevance, but mu is found throughout all scientific investigation. And nature doesn't cheat, and nature's answers are never irrelevant. It's a great mistake, a kind of dishonesty to sweep nature's mu answers under the carpet. Recognition and valuation of these answers would do a lot to bring logical theory closer to experimental practice. Every laboratory scientist knows that very often his experimental results provide mu answers to the yes-no questions that the experiments were designed for. So that's, again, restating the same thing. You know, to restructure rationality or to restructure science means that it's a back and forth between mu and yes-no, let's just say. And I think these mu answers are what propels things along. They are what propels things along in terms of progress. So think of the scientific paradigm shift. That's when something is ignored for, you know, so long that something starts needling at it, and then all of a sudden, mu, you know, the mu kind of comes in, and that old paradigm is kind of operating in mu, and then it shifts. You know, the answer comes. So mu answers are the ones that actually get the ball rolling. This low evaluation of the experiment which provided the mu answers isn't justified. The mu answer is an important one. It's told the scientist that the context of his question is too small for nature's answer, and he must enlarge the context of the question. That is a very important answer. Yes, it is. His understanding of nature is tremendously improved by it, which was the purpose of the experiment in the first place. A very strong case can be made for the statement that science grows by its mu answers more than by its yes or no answer. Yes or no confirms or denies a hypothesis. Mu says the answer is beyond the hypothesis. Mu is the phenomenon that inspires scientific inquiry in the first place. There's nothing mysterious or esoteric about it. It's just that our culture has warped us to make a low-value judgment of it. So don't let mu sap your gumption. As you can see, the way he's been describing mu, it sort of fits in with a lot of the other themes he's been talking about, and like the stuckness and the lateral drift. Those are the states which the highest quality facts, solutions, etc. emerge. They emerge from these mu states, like stuckness. The motorcycle seems to be running a little hot. I suppose it's just the hot, dry country we're going through. I'll leave the answer to that in a mu state until it gets worse or better. Time to switch to psychomotor traps. These include inadequate tools and how to remedy that by making sure you have good tools. And this still applies, probably more so than ever. One problem we have today is the proportion of low-quality goods in comparison to high quality. You know, I'm sure Persig would be appalled by the majority of Walmart fare. Stylization on steroids, and there's no substance there. Good tools, as a rule, don't wear out, and good secondhand tools are much better than inferior new ones. Study the tool catalogs. You can learn a lot from them. So Bad surroundings, or you could say bad feng shui, is another trap, and that would mean bad lighting. If the place you're working on your motorcycle, the garage is too hot or too cold. Discomfort obviously causes you to focus on on the discomfort and not what you're doing. So the next psychomotor trap is muscular insensitivity. It's not having the mechanics feel, he calls. The mechanics feel comes from a deep inner kinesthetic feeling for the elasticity of materials. When you take up a nut, there's a point called finger tight, where there's contact but no take up of elasticity. Then there's snug, in which the easy surface elasticity is taken up. Then there's a range called tight, in which all the elasticity is taken up. A person with mechanics feel knows when something's tight and stops. A person without it goes right on past and strips the threads or breaks the assembly. And so he goes into this to some extent. And like the parts traps, this section might have some crossover into the realms of motorcycle, into other realms besides motorcycle maintenance. I think probably what we're looking at here is you kind of have to train yourself to be kinesthetic if you're not. And it's interesting because you can really tell that Piercing he's really kinesthetically connected to his physical environment. And I would say that that is a problem we really suffer from. We are further and further removed from actually having our bodies in contact with the earth. Let's not use world, let's use Mary as the earth. Where and the practices that encourage that are probably something we sort of need these days because we're so immersed in the internet, where we don't really have to do anything. I mean, you could be, remember in Dune, that creature that eats too much spice. A man turns into this kind of worm from just being, I think, too much dopamine all the time. So back to the journey, the afternoon feeling sets in as he winds up the Chautauqua. Maybe it's just the usual late afternoon letdown, but after all I've said about these things today, I just have a feeling that I've somehow talked around the point. Some could ask, well, if I get around all these gumption traps, then will I have the thing licked? The answer, of course, is no. You still haven't got anything licked. You've got to live right, too. It's the way you live that predisposes you to avoid the traps and see the right facts. You want to know how to paint a perfect painting? It's easy. Make yourself perfect and just paint naturally. That's the way all the experts do it. I think he's talking about the Eastern painters. The making of a painting or the fixing of a motorcycle isn't separate from the rest of your existence. Quality existence. If you're a sloppy thinker, the 6 days of the week you aren't working on your machine, what trap avoidances, what gimmicks can make you all of a sudden sharp on the 7th? It all goes together. This is an unbelievably important point, and what I was trying to say earlier in the week about how you actually can work on yourself. You can make yourself more conscientious. You can make yourself more of a complete person. It was also what I was saying earlier in the week about extracting a practice from the totality. You extract that practice and it becomes a tool in service of a particular goal, say productivity or better focus and attention. These are worthy goals, but they're just goals. They exist within the subject-object world. They are logical, let's just say, progressions ensconced in a larger reality of your totality. But if you're a sloppy thinker 6 days a week and you really try to be sharp on the 7th, then maybe the next 6 days aren't going to be quite as sloppy as the preceding 6. What I'm trying to come up with on these gumption traps, I guess, is shortcuts to living right. Okay, living right. That again is what we're trying to achieve here, or what I'm trying to achieve with this channel. And it's also what I was saying in the first place about the fact you can actually improve yourself, your conscientiousness, let's say, with practice. And also in the greater sense of practice, this isolating thing like mindfulness for productivity or for attention. If you engage with it even from getting into it from that crack, it may ultimately be a way into a fuller overall attitude about complete self-improvement. So I'm definitely not critical of isolating these practices and using them for a goal, because often it opens up a door to something greater, to a more spiritual way of understanding of the world. So the next line is probably the best known in the book, since it sums up the whole journey. The real cycle you're working on is the cycle called yourself. The machine that appears to be out there and the person that appears to be in here are not two separate things. They grow towards quality or fall away from quality together. So I don't need to say anything more about that. That should be the mantra of this channel. So they arrive in Prineville Junction, Oregon. The worst depression yet. All that talk about gumption traps, and I fall right into one myself. So he notices the drivers have that look in their eyes that Sylvia noticed at the beginning of the book, which she said were like they were in a funeral procession, and he kind of dismissed that as her kind of airy-fairy way of thinking. But now he's seeing it himself, especially with the depression he experiences, of course, late in the day. And he sees the people that they drive differently, too, that they're more like trying to get from point A to point B. And they seem very isolated, and it's noticeable, which makes him wonder about it. Wonder about this difference he's seeing. I know what it is. We've arrived at the West Coast. We're all strangers again. Folks, I just forgot the biggest gumption trap of all, the funeral procession, the one everybody's in, this hyped up, fuck you, super modern ego style of life that thinks it owns this country. We've been out of it for so long, I've forgotten all about it. Well, that certainly speaks to the attitude. That has not changed, let's just say, from 1968. I went to Oregon recently, and I found that it didn't really have that attitude. But then again, I live in Washington, D.C., so relatively speaking, I guess, Pirsig was comparing it to Minnesota, and maybe, the demographics have changed where I'm not sure, but this attitude I certainly see on the East Coast. You probably see it in the big cities on the West Coast. I think it's more of a big city attitude. Farther south, we find a forest of scrubby trees subdivided into ridiculous little lots, some developer's scheme, apparently. At one of the lots, far off from the main highway, we spread out our sleeping bags and discover that the pine needles just barely cover what must be many feet of spongy dust. I've never seen anything like it. We have to be careful not to kick up the needles or the dust flies up over everything. So I'm putting in that last paragraph because I'm wondering about the significance of the superficiality, I think, is the main theme here. This paragraph has got to mean something, because just about everything in this book means something. So I hope that made sense, and I will see you next Sunday for chapter 27.